Good morning, everybody. By my time, it says 9:01, so I apologize for us being a little bit late. Welcome to the early edition of the House Commerce Committee. Our clerk staff asked us to spread our times out today with hopefully we will be closing this committee at the end of today's business. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Alexander, Boyd, Calfee, Camper, Faison, Haston, Hazelwood, Holsclaw, Johnson, Lynn, Manis, Moon, Powell, Powers, Sparks, Thompson, Towns, Vital, Zachary, Vice Chairman Bricken, Chairman Vaughn.
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
All righty, thank you. And for those of you brave souls who are here at this time this morning, I want to thank you for your dedication to the people of the great state of Tennessee. We have two items on our calendar today. And again, our goal today is going to be that we are able to close this committee following our actions today, subject to the call of the chair. For folks, we've got quite a bit of people on the calendar to testify today on our two items. I would let everyone know that we pride ourselves on decorum here. There's no running debate. We ask that everyone treat people the way that you would like to be treated. We have received names 24 hours in advance. We have them on the list. Whenever we call your name, we ask that you please come sit at the microphone. And if we want to double load the table so for the ability for logistical sake, then we can do that. And you will have 3 minutes for your prepared remarks. If you can get your point across in less than that, we would appreciate it. But with that, we're going to start on today's regular calendar, and we are starting with House Bill 645 by Chairman Faison.
Motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion and a second, and I see we have some amendments.
We do have one amendment that writes the bill, Mr. Chair.
All righty, let's go ahead and get that thing on the bill, and then we'll discuss the bill. Drafting code is 016138. Is that the one?
That's what I have.
I got a motion on the amendment. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor of attaching 16138 to House Bill 645, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Ayes have it. We are on the bill as amended, Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and committee, we do have some people who'd like to testify on this bill. And with your indulgence, maybe when I explain the bill, it would understand more why I'm bringing the bill after we hear people explain it. Are you good with that, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. It is your prerogative. You would like to have testimony prior to presenting your bill. That's fine by me. With that, we are going to go out of session, and we have Ms. Barbara Culligan and Ms. Kelly Clark here to testify on that bill. And so, ladies, as you come down and sit at the table, again, punch the red button to turn your microphone on. Give us your name and address for the record. Do we need their address? No, we don't need. No, we don't need your address. That was the meeting I was at last night. I apologize. Just your name and who you represent. And with that, we're out of session.
I apologize for my raspy voice. It's either allergies or from screaming at the television for March Madness, because I want to tell you that my bracket picks are still alive. So, good morning. My name is Barbara Culligan. I am a short-term rental host who has been negatively affected by the City of Nashville's regulatory overreach. Here's my story. In 2017, I began looking for a new home here in Nashville. I specifically chose a home where a part of it could be rented out separately because it was designed with a studio bedroom with its own porch and entrance. I paid more money than other comparable houses to purchase this house because of this amenity. Before buying it, I checked with Nashville Metro codes that this property would be eligible for an owner-occupied short-term rental permit and was assured it was. In early 2018, I was issued an owner-occupied permit for my home. Less than a year later, Nashville decided that it had misinterpreted their word, a section of its own short-term rental law, and revoked my permit along with 144 other owner-occupied permits. In order to be able to comfortably afford to keep my home, I was forced to file suit, and as a result, a temporary injunction order was issued on February 11, 2019. The city agreed before the court to allow me, as well as other homeowners who filed suit, to continue to rent our properties while the matter was being adjudicated. Just 4 days after that agreement, the city of Nashville ordered me to cease renting or advertising my property for rent. My attorney filed a contempt of court motion, and the court agreed. Nashville was held in contempt. The first time in the state's history, all 223 years at that point, that a Tennessee municipality was held in contempt of court. Think of the enormity of that. Since 1796, no city in Tennessee has violated a court order so thoroughly that a judge could find them to be in contempt, because contempt implies willful disobedience, and that is a very high bar to clear. But clear it Nashville did. The city revoked permits when the court had told the city specifically that it could not do so. The city's bad actor behavior cost me more than $25,000 in legal and other fees. Metro Council has used every available lever to thwart constitutionally protected rights. Since 2019, the city has introduced many STR-related ordinances, which range from removing zoned areas where STRs were previously allowed to increasing permitting fees by 500%. A law that would require a homeowner to be in their home for at least 15 hours a day while guests are present is still being discussed. Think how far Metro Council's assault on property rights has come when Metro deems it acceptable that the government has the right to regulate how many hours residents spend in their own home.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Ms. Culligan. Well, that concludes our three minutes. We're on a time schedule today. I believe you made your points well, though. Ms. Clark. And let me get a timeout here. If you could punch that red button, pull the mic down, we'll be able to hear you better.
Is that on?
That's it.
Okay, sorry. My name is Kelly Clark Von Shipman. In January of 2017, I was a newly divorced mother of 5, trying to figure out how not to lose the only home my children had ever known. I spent my days working, attending my boys' sporting events and my girls' musical performances, and taking them on college visits, most of which was paid for in credit cards. I spent my evenings helping my twins fill out financial aid forms and college loan applications. In July of that same year, I began hosting weekends when the kids went to their fathers. Fast forward to today, I now have 2 college graduates, 1 grad student, 1 in his senior year filling out law school applications, and 1 still attending. Because of the income Airbnb and short-term rentals has brought in, my kids can still come home for holidays to the rooms they grew up in. Not only was I able to keep that home, I was also able to pay off all of my credit card debt, and I'm now able to help them with tuition rather than help them rack up student loan debt. Life-changing is the only way that I know how to describe what being able to host my home has meant to my family.
We appreciate you joining us here today. Thank you very much for your testimony. With that, we're going to go back into session. Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Mr. Chair, House Bill 645, my intent is to make sure there is reasonable regulations. 2 weeks ago, I heard the gentleman right here from Shelby County saying it's right to have reasonable regulations on small businesses. I would contend to this committee that an Airbnb in your own private home is a small business. I understand that the local government needs to have the ability to regulate them, but the local government should not have the ability to completely squash you in your home and make it to where you don't have a reasonable expectation. So this bill basically does 6 things in my effort to make sure there's reasonable expectations in Nashville and a reasonable expectation. This is what we're doing. The first one, we clarify that this bill only impacts owner-occupied short-term rentals. That means, according to the TCA, where you live, where you spend your holidays, where your address is registered to vote, where your driver's license is, that we're clarifying that this bill only impacts short-term rentals in Nashville that are where you live. Secondly, if there has been a frustration or a violation 3 times within a 12-month period, you can lose your permit. Obviously, we don't want neighborhoods having neighbors being frustrated. We have to accept the fact that there have been times with short-term rentals that neighbors are very angry at the partying and thuggery, if you will, that's going on beside them. That's not what this bill is trying to do. The reason we limit this only to short-term rentals that are owner-occupied is to make sure where you live, you're taking care of your place. So if your neighbors complain with you 3 times within a 12-month period, you can lose your permit. The third thing is it only applies to Nashville, section 6 and 9. The fourth thing that I think is one of the most important things is that if Nashville does decide to remove a permit or a permit is coming up to be renewed, they have to give a 90-day warning, let them know what's going on, tell people, hey, you can't just snatch a permit from a homeowner without even letting them know and whatever, I'll dialoguing with that, sending a letter with anything. And the fifth thing that the bill does is if a homeowner feels like they've been done wrong by the city of Nashville, they're able to recoup their legal fees if they go to court and prove that they have been done wrong and the city of Nashville broke the law. And this allows them to recoup their legal fees. And that's basically what the bill does. And now I'm ready for questions.
All righty, thank you. Do we have questions for our bill sponsor? Any questions, any comments? I see you, Representative Thompson.
Okay, Mr. Sponsor, this applies only to Nashville. Is that what you're saying? Is that what I heard?
Mr. Sponsor.
Yes, sir, that is correct. Section 6 through 9, we've narrowed the language that this impacts Nashville.
Representative Thompson.
Can you explain why? Why are we not putting the same bill on other municipalities and counties throughout this whole state?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Representative. From my studies, seeing what's going on, Nashville has been the most egregious to people who were grandfathered in. Just like this young lady you heard a few minutes ago, there was a reasonable expectation that she had that she could use her short-term rental in such a way, and then all of a sudden they just come in and decide they can't do that. Other cities in Tennessee who do have some strict regulations have been that way from the beginning. And Nashville has changed and gone back and forth so much and there's been no expectation or reasonable regulation recently. So that's why we're targeting this area right here.
One more.
Yes, sir.
So if we start having problems with other municipalities across the state, maybe even yours or mine, are we going to come back with another bill then to restrict that municipality?
Mr. Sponsor.
Absolutely. And I would remind the gentleman from Shelby County, the reason part of America's greatness is that the rule of law is here to protect the weak. Our entire institution, the way America was created, is that we have a reasonable expectation with our government and with somebody who's powerful or more powerful than us. That's why we have laws, to make sure that the rich and powerful can't just squash the little man. And what we have found here in Nashville is that the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the kangaroo courts, if you will, of the judicial and the legislative branch, they have come down and squashed the little man who's just trying their best. So I would say if there are cities who have been egregious to their people in such a way that this city has, we'll do the same there too.
One more.
Last one, Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what you're saying. You know, a lot of times when you're protecting some little people, you're also taking away the rights of others. And I none of our laws are perfect, but as I see it, we need to give some leeway to every municipality to protect itself. And I think that we need to give Nashville and every other municipality some leeway on regulations of their Airbnbs.
Thank you. Chairman Powers, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the sponsor, I do have a quick question. My understanding was that one part of the bill, one aspect of it, the three strikes and you're out rule, my understanding was that did have statewide application. I hope it does, but is that correct or not?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, my understanding of the bill that this is local application right here, but we could confer to legal, Mr. Chair, to make sure on that.
Out of session, we shall go to rely on our trusty legal minds sitting to my left.
Thank you, Chairman. Jamie Shanks, Office of Legal Services. As the sponsor was mentioning before, certain sections of this bill appear to be more limited in their application because they have certain provisions that limit them, such as having ordinances prior to May 1st, 2015. The part that talks about the 3 or more separate times within a 12-month period, though, does not have similar limiting language.
Thank you. So I would say that sounded to me like we have statewide application on the 3 strikes in a year's time period. Good. I thought I was hearing good. All right. Chairman Powers.
Yeah, yes, thank you. And that's what I wanted to clarify. I thought it did have statewide application, so I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Lynn.
Thank you very much. And this is to the sponsor of the bill. When I
Time
read-
out, Representative Lynn.
Of course.
Now we're back in session. Representative Lynn.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is to the sponsor of the bill. When I read the previous amendment, it seemed to me that there were a couple of definitions in the bill for the owner of a short-term rental. And one of the definitions appeared to me to apply to REITs. And as so if someone owned a short-term rental through a REIT, even though the members of the REIT change, they don't have to do a transference within the city that the short-term rental has changed ownership. And the thing that, comes to mind for me is, I know in my district, many of our neighborhoods are used to be lower priced homes. They have been taken over by rental companies. And it's just about every other house or more that is owned by a rental company. And so it really has changed the feeling of our neighborhoods. They're not so much neighborhoods anymore. They're, people who live there for just a little bit and then they go on. The housing prices have escalated greatly due to this. And these companies come in and they will purchase a home 20% above asking. It's really very shocking. And they really price out just kids who went to school and grew up in Mount Juliet and want to live there. They price them out of owning a home in the town in which they grew up. And so when I saw that language, which seemed to make it much easier for maybe REITs like BlackRock and things like that to, buy into and maybe capture a whole neighborhood with short-term rentals, or even maybe not even a neighborhood, but maybe commercial areas of a city where there are hotels and whatnot, and maybe they'd run a short-term rental hotel type of thing, not really a hotel, but just take over the building. It seemed to apply to that. So is this definition broad enough to capture a REIT and where they could engage in that kind of activity?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, Section 9, subsection 2, you will see that it clarifies this bill only deals with owner occupied. It has nothing to do with people being able to buy multiple properties, turn them into rental use. This is only your primary residence as according to the TCA is listed as a primary residence. And this bill would only impact that.
Representative Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then other people who maybe own short-term rental, like say there's an individual, maybe they bought a house in Nashville because their kid was going to college, their kid's done, and now they want to VRBO that to maybe other people who are visiting the college or visiting the area. Does it prevent that kind of activity?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, this bill only deals with the people who live in their house, owner occupied houses. It has nothing to do if they bought something for their child or somebody else or want to rent it out. This only is the people who live in their house as their primary residence according to the TCA.
Representative Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anybody else inquisitive? Anyone else wanting to pontificate? See none of that going on here. Oh, now that we mentioned that, Leader Camper's hand went up. Leader Camper.
Now that we're pontificating. No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Faison, in the amendment on page 3, I believe it is, section 9, subparagraph A. Could you go to that portion? You with me?
Thank you.
You with me?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Leader Camper. That's one of the areas that are making sure that this is limited to Nashville. If
Okay.
except as otherwise provided in 13-7607 of local government body expressly authorized. Is that the paragraph you're talking
That
about?
is the paragraph.
I'm sorry.
That's the paragraph.
Yes, ma'am. That's part of the bill that makes that applicable to Nashville.
My question is the last portion of the paragraph. Trying to see what you're getting at with that, where it says, or otherwise limit the ability of a person to use an owner-occupied property or property that is commercially zoned as a short-term rental. Can you clarify that portion for me?
Thank
Mr.
you.
Sponsor.
Thank you, Leader Camper, Chairman. Historically, over the last few years, Nashville has decided to just arbitrarily change the zoning on an entire area. You could have your deed, your home where you live, and it be zoned one way. The Metro Council decide, you know what, we don't like the way this area is zoned, and they just arbitrarily come in and change the entire zoning. And I've got people who could come in and testify about that if you'd want to, but that's what this is. You're not just going to be able to come in and just arbitrarily decide to change zoning in a neighborhood without going through all the right processes.
Yes, Ms. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I think I get your point, but I'm not going to agree that it is an arbitrary decision. I'm sure that there was a thought process that went into why they may have zoned it commercially for a lot of times we don't necessarily understand all the inner workings of a city and what's going on with all the growth in Nashville. And, this whole area has grown. And, I'm sure they have reasons for why, they may have zoned it commercial. I was just trying to get clarity to make sure I understood where you were coming from. So it appears that you may have an owner-occupied house in an area that when they purchased it, it was a residential area. That home is still there and may have been, a few properties around it may have been rezoned later on, and now it's mostly commercial, and this one property or two is still in that area, is what it appears to me. but I understand your point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Leader. Representative Towns.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And just as my chairman pontificates, we're going to see if we can join you in a little pontificating this morning. And Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to ask, make a statement as it relates to due process and eminent domain. Cities have always taken property and changed things with eminent domain. I mean, I don't like it, but I know over the history of our country and our state, they do it. And it pisses some people off because sometimes that's air property. You know, it's property that's been in the family for a very long time. How does this, Mr. Representative, impact the ability of the city to still leverage that which they have in their quiver to take property, what we're doing here in Nashville?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this bill doesn't really deal with that, Representative Towns.
Representative, knowing you, I bet you got a follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, you're a wise man, all-knowing. I wish you could give me a winning lottery ticket number. I'd split the money with you. Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'd like to get just for my understanding and maybe some other members, a legal opinion on what our council thinks about that. How does it impact legally?
All righty, out of session, we shall go to seek that opinion.
Jamie Shanks, Office of Legal Services. To my understanding, your question was with regard to, does this bill affect the eminent domain authority of the municipalities affected? This area of the law that's being changed right now is dealing with their zoning authority, and the eminent domain part of the code is in a different section. So I believe this would not impact their eminent domain authority.
We are back into session now. Representative Towns.
Oh, okay, so it's the opinion of council that it does not impact eminent domain at this particular point in time. Now, and unfortunately, what happened to our testifying guests, it's tough. It's tough. And however, considering all of that, you have one person or you have several in the community or one in the community that wants to do something, and then the other part, the majority of the community may not see it the same. Are we balancing this with the rights of those that are on the opposite side of the fence, Mr. Representative, as we present this bill? Do you think we're covering them as well, not being unilateral in how we're presenting this?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Towns, my intent is to make sure that you have a reasonable regulations from the governing body, local governing body of Nashville, and reasonable expectations with your largest investment. When you say people on the other side of the fence, if you're referring to neighbors,
Yeah.
I think that's where you're referring to.
Yeah.
We do have that in there. If there's issues within a year, you complain and it's substantiated complaints, then you can lose your permit to be able to do this. So
Okay.
I think there is reason, there's cause for the people who are owner occupied short-term rentals to make sure whatever's taking place at their house, in their house, is in compliance with the local restrictions and making sure that the partying is not crazy in such a way that neighbors are frustrated or they'll lose their permit.
Thank you, Representative Towns.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. Thank you, Ms. Faison. Representative, appreciate it.
Representative Holtzclaw.
Thank you, Chairman. And just for clarification, if Nashville does go through rezoning and changes your criteria, are you grandfathered in?
Mr. Sponsor.
If we pass this bill, you will be.
Thank you, Chairman.
Representative. Thank you. Seeing no other hands, without objection, we're going to call the question on House Bill 645 as amended. Let your ayes be aye, let your noes be no. I will have my listening devices on the best I can. All in favor of House Bill 645, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Ayes have it. 645 is on. It's double referred. It is headed off to local government from here. If you are a no, please let the clerk register your vote. And with that, since I am going to be presenting House Bill 2246, we're going to pass the gavel to our very capable hands of Vice Chairman Brickens.
All right, we're still in session. All right, Mr. Chairman, you're recognized on House Bill 2246.
Motion.
Thank you, sir.
All right, this bill has an amendment. It's tracking code 016609. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Motion.
We have a motion. Second. All in favor of putting, does this amendment make the bill?
Yes, sir. It rewrites the bill.
All right. All in favor of putting this amendment on the bill, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the amendment's on the bill. Mr. Chairman, Unier would like to speak on the bill?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. And what I thought I would do, I appreciate y'all putting that amendment on there. Just give y'all a little rundown of what we've been working on since this bill came through subcommittee. We held a group meeting one afternoon or one morning, it was a morning, up on the 8th floor. Very well attended by a number of stakeholders. We talked about various aspects of the bill. And so we took a lot of those comments, placed them in this amendment. And what I'd like to do, because I have been inundated by emails that by folks that didn't really understand what was in the bill, apparently. So I need to clarify for my committee members actually what is in this amendment. The crux of the bill states that a political subdivision of this state shall not, arising from or as a result of a local action, prohibit the development and implementation of the types of or sources of energy that may be used, delivered, converted, or supplied by the following entities. Then it lists several, including electric utility, transmitter of electricity, gas utilities or systems, gas transmission companies, liquid petroleum companies, and then other liquid petroleum transmission, distribution, retail, and storage entities. What follows is a local action of a political subdivision is preempted and void if the local action directly or indirectly is or acts as a de facto prohibition of the siting or a prohibition of construction, expansion, or maintenance of energy, industrial, or related transportation infrastructure within the jurisdictional boundary of the political subdivision. That is what the bill does. Let me tell you what the bill does not do, because I think that's very critical to hear. When you look down in section C, specifically, this section does not prevent or preempt. And when you look over through there on section 2, following that, it does not preempt a local action that is state authorized, ministerial in nature, pertaining to land use, generally applicable with similar types of commercial and industrial activities, and necessary to provide a public benefit. That is the definition of zoning and right-of-way control. Local municipalities will still have the ability to enact zoning regulations with regards to these types of businesses. In addition, we heard concerns about groundwater protection. Most communities have wellhead protection ordinances. I know mine does. I live in a very heavily regulated community, a community that's crisscrossed by pipelines carrying various items. And we have a very strict zoning code. Most wellhead protection and groundwater protection, you'll find a section in the local zoning code, but we added, in case that communities do not have that coverage, a local action arising from authority granted to administer a program in lieu of the Department of Environment and Conservation regarding protection of human health, safety, or the environment, if the grant of authority is authorized by a federal, state statute or regulation, and the groundwater protection program or the drinking water program administered by the Department of Environment and Conservation, including but not limited to measures designed to be protective within a designated source of water or wellhead protection areas as defined in programs administered by the Department of Environment and Conservation. So we are honoring zoning, the regulation of this area through zoning. We're also honoring local communities' ability to protect their groundwater. Then after we started going through this some more, we were contacted by the city of Memphis because there's been a high-profile case, potential project that was suspended as a result of community outpouring of sentiment. So we dealt with the city of Memphis attorney and said, what language could you provide us that would provide you with some ease with regards to how this statute will affect the city of Memphis? And what they supplied us back with, we adopted verbatim into our bill. It says that reasonable police powers of a political subdivision to regulate the siting, construction, maintenance, or expansion of energy or industrial infrastructure along, over, or under the highways and streets within the political subdivision's corporate limits in order to reduce or prevent the risk of an imminent and substantial threat to human safety from the performance of those activities, including a political subdivision's right to charge reasonable cost-based compensation for the use of the political subdivision's highways and streets. We adopted that verbatim by the city of Memphis attorney. So what we have now is a bill that is down to what I had wanted to address first off whenever we brought this thing forward. Infrastructure, energy infrastructure is critical to ensure affordable, reliable, and sustainable fuel and industrial materials to support our Tennessee's economy and also our local and state transportation needs. Critical energy infrastructure extends beyond a single jurisdiction's boundaries. Sources to loads are typically provided in a linear path. What this does is this protects that pathway because sometimes this critical energy infrastructure passes through communities that it does not serve. It's necessary to ensure consumer choice will not be limited, and here's the critical portion, that markets rather than governments are driving future energy innovation, and that all of Tennessee's citizens have access to affordable and reliable energy. It provides certainty to the regulated community, local governments, as well as the general public to ensure that necessary critical infrastructure can be developed. And I'd have to say that a complex patchwork of local government regulations will put the safest and most efficient means of transporting vital energy resources and other important materials at risk, compromising the availability of resources in times of emergency and increasing the cost of already precious commodities we use on a day-to-day basis. I was reminded of that. $5.25 seemed to be the going rate between Memphis and Nashville this morning. Shout out for diesel. Shout out to the pilot on exit 163. They won the day at 383 with regards to unleaded fuel. What this bill is trying to capture is to say to local jurisdictions, and if you think about it, if you're an opponent to fossil fuels or you want to see innovation and you want this country to change its energy policy, what better way than to seek a ban at a local level? For us to pass this bill in this House, it's going to require 67 aye votes between us and the Senate. Sometimes city councils 3 votes can win the day. Sometimes county commissions, 7 votes can win the day. And what you can have is you can have an impediment placed into a project by people who don't even live in the region that the project is meant to serve. So that's what we're trying to do here. And with that, in this bill, we're not saying that a local community can say, hey, we don't want that there. Here's a better place. We're allowing that. What we're saying is we're telling local communities you cannot say, not anywhere. That cannot exist in our community anywhere. I think that this energy infrastructure is more important than that. And that's why I'm bringing the bill, because I think that we need to stabilize the type of energy that's offered. We're protecting the environment. We're honoring local communities to choose where this infrastructure and what it looks like and where it goes. But we are prohibiting the restriction to where it does not exist at all. And with that, I'll conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for a very thorough explanation of your bill. I understand we have several people that want to provide testimony on this bill. So if it's okay with you, we'll go out of session and call up these presenters. So we're out of session. We have a list of about 10 folks that would like to speak. I'm not sure if they're all here. So I'm going to just call them up, and if they can just start populating the chairs, we'll just get to them. Please be reminded that each speaker only has 3 minutes. So is George Nolan here? All right, George, you're up first, and then Brittany Thornton, she can take a seat. Makita Bradshaw, Robert Connor, Paul Klein, and the Reverend Paul Slintz. I think that would be all the seats we have for the moment. All right, please be reminded, each presenter only has 3 minutes. We'll be keeping track of the time, so if I gavel you out, please understand that. So, all right, first up, Mr. Nolan, would you please present yourself?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is George Nolan, and I'm a lawyer with the Southern Environmental Law Center. I'm also a farmer and a rural landowner. I grew up in Dixon County. I went to Dixon Public Schools, and I raised cows with my brother in Bon Aqua, Tennessee. As a lawyer and a native Tennessean, I'm very concerned about some of the broad language that still remains in this bill. I appreciate the amendments that Chairman Vaughn explained, but in particular, the language on page 3, paragraph B, 2, and 3 will be used by pipeline companies to suggest that local governments shouldn't have the power to regulate the safety and siting of this particular type of infrastructure. Now, if this is passed, it'll apply to every county commission, every city government, every school board, and zoning board in all 95 counties, and they won't be able to regulate the safety of this big infrastructure as they should. And it's important that they be able to, because pipelines and storage tanks over time are prone to ruptures and leaks. They can pollute groundwater, and sometimes they can even explode. For example, my home county of Dixon in 1992, a pipeline leak exploded near White Bluff, burned 400 acres of farmland, destroyed 5 houses, and sent 3 people to the hospital. Now, fortunately, that happened in a rural area. Not many folks were hurt, but what if it had been near a school? So local government should have the prerogative to regulate the safety and siting of these things and pass a law that says you can't put a high-pressure methane gas storage facility next to a school. The second problem with the bill is it'll remove the bargaining power from local governments. In Dixon right now, there's a Texas company is building a huge petroleum storage facility right near I-40. It's been controversial because it's upstream of the community's drinking water, but the county has negotiated with the Texas company and got them to agree to impose additional environmental safety limits, and also agreed to provide the community more than $1.4 million of benefits to the local community. But if you pass a law like this, then you are taking away the bargaining power of the local government. And so I'm concerned that because a few folks are annoyed by something that happened in Memphis, you all are being asked to pass a sweeping piece of legislation that's going to mess up the balance of power and have many unfortunate and unintended consequences. And I appreciate y'all considering my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Any questions from the committee to Mr. Nolan? Representative Towns?
Mr. Nolan, thank you for that presentation. Whereas when that erupted, okay, and did it mess up the drinking water? Were there any citizens that were killed, and how much property damage was done, and how much was involved in terms of repairing the area? How much money was spent, if you can recall those 3 or 4 things? Okay.
Thank you, Representative Towns. So it's my understanding that nobody was killed.
Okay, thank God.
It wasn't a groundwater problem because it was a methane gas pipeline that exploded.
Okay.
So there's a considerable amount of property damage because a big fire was started. I don't have any specific numbers on that.
Representative Towns?
Mr. Chairman, thank you again. Here again, you talked about something that's very, it should be very, very well known that when we talk about protecting the water with these liners and so forth, that they don't last as long as we think. And when they have erupted or deteriorated, it's some time that elapsed, lots of time that elapsed before we discover it. And do you know at this point just how long these liners are supposed to last in some of these particular areas? And if you do, fine. If you don't, I understand.
I don't know how long liners typically last. I mean, I can tell you that in the county of Dixon, for example, and this big petroleum storage facility that's going in, that is upstream of Turnbull Creek, which is where the community gets its drinking water. So the county and the Texas company developing that facility got crossways, and there was some litigation, but they ultimately negotiated a settlement of that litigation, and included in the settlement was the requirement that the company would have to engage in additional groundwater testing to make sure that any leaks were caught. They would have to implement additional spill containment procedures. They agreed to contribute $400,000 to the community for the purchase of another fire truck, and they agreed to contribute $1 million to the community for the construction of an ag center. Now, that it's important for counties to have the leverage to negotiate terms like that when rich and powerful out-of-state companies come in and want to build something in their community, particularly if it's going to be upstream of a drinking water source. So if you look at this bill and in sections B, 2, and 3, that language is very broad. And so what's going to happen is that these out-of-state companies are going to use those two paragraphs to write scary letters to county attorneys when something like this is coming in. And, you know, counties don't have deep pockets like some out-of-state energy companies do. So they're going to use this legislation to scare counties away from taking reasonable measures to keep their communities safe.
Thank you, sir.
That concludes Mr. Nolan's presentation. Just to move the time forward, we're going to let these other speakers talk and then open up the questions to everybody that's sitting up here at this panel at the end. So if with that, Brittany Thornton.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for your time today. My name is Brittany Thornton. I'm a native Memphian of a community named Historic Orange Mound, the oldest Black community in the city of Memphis. I'm here not in expert capacity, but here in solidarity for an attempt to strip us as Tennesseans of our local authority. So I believe that this is a dangerous bill in our Tennessee state legislature, and its consideration will undermine local decision-making power in the name of energy independence. There are multiple points that will be made today, but I really want to just echo and emphasize that this bill is so broad that it could allow for rampant use of eminent domain and might not even be legal. It prevents local decision-making power over projects, even when they're owned by out-of-state or foreign companies. If passed, it would also make other states more vulnerable to this type of legislation promoted by fossil fuel entities. So I echo that there should be stark pause in the consideration for the advancement of this legislation, and that we really consider the sweeping impact of such detrimental legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. Appreciate that report. Next, we have Ms. Bradshaw. I'll get your mic. Is it?
All right. I'm going to ask y'all to have a little assignment.
Reintroduce yourself, please. So.
Hi, my name is Marquita Bradshaw. I grew up in South Memphis down the street from a super fun site. In the state of Tennessee, we have 1,000 Superfund sites across the state, right? And that is because certain communities bear the brunt of the downside of energy infrastructure, right? Just because there's energy infrastructure and people are benefiting from it doesn't mean that certain people don't carry the burden of pollution. And so I am here today as an environmental justice expert, but also I'm here as a mother, a aunt, cousin, and lover of my community. When you say this bill will say not anywhere for certain communities, let me tell you, Memphis, Tennessee needs the ability to say not anywhere. When you go to homefacts.com and you put in your community, I want you to look and see how many environmental hazards, how many Superfund sites, brownfields, tanks, and spills that are in your community. It's on a tab that looks like a little, so it has like the school, the little health, the little safety thing to tell you about the police. And then the next one is like the environmental part on homefacts.com. Why I want you to go there? Because Tennessee, we have 1,100. How many do you think Memphis, Tennessee has? How many? We carry the burden of everybody's energy right about now. We carry the burden. What does that mean? That means health effects. That means people in our community are sick and dying from energy infrastructure that makes people sick, from fossil fuels. And it's not just isolated to Memphis, Tennessee. It is also rural communities that's carrying the burden of pollution too, all over the state. And so you're going to say to a community that's been carrying the burden of not the financial part of pollution, because our energy burden is too great right about now. My energy bill is half of my mortgage. I am blessed to be a homeowner. That's too much. So something that we're doing is not working when it comes to energy infrastructure. When people have to carry the burden, there are lives lost. There are true environmental consequences, and there are casualties. My mom is on peritoneal dialysis for the last 6 years, waiting on a kidney through no fault of her own, because she lives in a community that carries the burden of pipelines, of gas lines, of the energy infrastructure that's
Excuse
supposed
me,
to make
Miss-
the rest of the world cheap. And I'm not even finished
Ms.
yet.
Bradshaw,
And I want you to go to homefacts.com, and I'm gonna make this last point
Bradshaw,
about how many
please wrap up.
Memphis when it comes to Memphis infrastructure of what we're carrying. And I am asking you to put an environmental justice clause in your bill for a community that has the burden of pollution to be
Thank you.
able to protect their public health. Because in Memphis, Tennessee right now, we have 226 Superfund sites out of that 1,000 sites. And that's my last point. Thank you so much.
Please be mindful of the time. 3 minutes. So, Mr. Connor, you're next.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman Vaughn, Commerce Committee members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak before this esteemed committee. Thank you for Chairman Vaughn for having the stakeholder meeting. Really appreciated that. My name is Robert Connor. I've lived in Tennessee since 1996. I own a farm in Dixon County in the community of Cumberland Furnace. I'm a professional engineer and mechanical engineering and project management professional. I did work for Chevron for 34 years. For the last 20 years of my career, I installed oil and gas pipelines in locations including California, Papua New Guinea, Kazakhstan, Nigeria. How did I get involved in this today? Approximately 3 months ago, I learned about a proposed gas pipeline to the Cumberland City Power Plant, which would cross my farm. Since then, I've learned a little bit more about legislation, heard about this today, had concerns, so I wanted to come here and voice those today. From what I have read, House Bill 2246 minimized the ability of community authorities to regulate the installation of energy facilities, especially pipelines. And I say minimize because I saw the words ministerial versus administrative in there, in the wording. I'm not an attorney, though. Why is this bad to me? There is no federal nor state regulation on how far pipelines must be constructed from buildings, including homes, schools, and churches. This is especially critical for large, high-pressure transmission lines. I do have a little bit more of the data. The incident in White Bluff in 1992, the fire, it destroyed 3 homes, 6 people were injured, 400 acres burned. Right now, as I said, that there's no required setback. Kinder Morgan crossing across my farm uses a 25-foot setback. In fact, they're considering routing their pipeline 50 feet from my neighbor's house. And I did go do some industry research for a 600-pound pipeline, 30-inch, which is going across mine. It'll cause a fire within 500 feet radius that will destroy everything. And anybody within that radius within 10 seconds will die. So now, it doesn't happen often, but I'm going to ask you, do you want that to be next to your house? My concern is there's no regulation for this. The only people that look out, since intrastate pipelines are only regulated by the state. So we look to the state to do this. However, there's not a FERC, an organization in the state like FERC. FERC regulates all the interstate pipelines. There's nothing here in the state necessarily to do that. Even the PUC's Pipeline Safety Group, they enforce safety regulations. However, they have nothing whatsoever to do in the construction. So it's only, I mean, mostly.
Mr. Connor?
Yes,
your-
I'm sorry.
Your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Klein.
Greetings, representatives. My name is Paul Klein. I'm here today as a voting resident of Cordova within the city of Memphis. I agree with the sponsor of the previous bill that the rule of law is to protect the weak. After facing the threat of the Byhalia pipeline coming through our city and possibly damaging our sole source of drinking water last year, thousands of local residents of different colors and from all walks of life came together in a united coalition to speak out against it. Faced with such massive opposition, Byhalia Pipeline LLC canceled their plans. People power had won. However, the best win came afterwards because over the next few months, our local city and county governments both worked to enact historic legislation to protect our aquifer. Both of these legislative bodies truly demonstrated beautiful examples of Abraham Lincoln's vision of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I would expect nothing less from you, my state representatives. You folks are pledged to represent us, these people of Tennessee, and not the oil and gas pipeline companies. Quoting from your oath of office, which each of you took, you swore to perform your official duties impartially, without favor or prejudice, and to always protect the rights of the people. I'm only asking you to do exactly that today in your vote. HB 2246 will most certainly strip Tennessee communities of local control, contrary to most Tennesseans' conservative values of less big government. I'm concerned that the broad implications of this bill will take away local control from all 95 counties, all planning commissions, municipalities, and other boards like groundwater quality control boards, and hand that decision-making power over to private energy companies, possibly even foreign companies. Our local governments should have all options available to review future energy infrastructure projects so that they can be responsive to the will of their residents. This legislation does exactly the opposite, prioritizing the interests of the project sponsors first, like oil and gas companies, and not the needs of the people. It undercuts our ability to provide meaningful comments on energy infrastructure projects that will affect our property, our air and water quality. It also bypasses any local health and safety legislation established for our protection. Local governments would have no input over whether toxic pipelines were run right near homes, schools, churches, hospitals, parks, or farms. It may even be in conflict with the Safe Drinking Water Act and possibly other federal laws. I do not support it. I'm very concerned. I ask that you vote against it. The all-American values of property rights, self-determination, and less governmental overreach are near and dear to me and all Tennesseans, I believe. Thank you in advance for your careful consideration of this matter.
Yes. Mr. Chairman and committee members, my name is Paul Slentz, and I'm a retired pastor in the Tennessee Western Kentucky Conference of the United Methodist Church. I live with my wife in the Bellshire neighborhood of Northeast Nashville. Thank you for this opportunity to express my strong opposition to this bill. On a weekday afternoon in August 2014, I was standing in the fellowship hall of the church I was serving in West Nashville when I heard a huge explosion. I ran to the nearest window and saw a fireball engulfing the plastics recycling factory next door to the church, about 50 yards from where I was standing. A tanker truck had just filled up at the nearby energy depot, fuel depot, and had come around a bend in the road too fast and had overturned. It spilled all of its contents out onto the road. There was immediately a huge explosion that again engulfed that factory next door. And then the gasoline started to flow into the sewers of the surrounding area. Soon emergency responders were there and they told us to evacuate right away. And so we did, but before doing so, I went down 3 blocks in the residential area. This was commercial and residential, the residential area where I served, and to check with some of my members. As I was driving down there, all of a sudden I saw fire coming up through a sewer opening as I was driving by. And this was happening all over the neighborhood. So rather than staying there, I went on. I called the 3 people that I was trying to get in touch with, and they were absolutely terrified. They did not know what to do. They'd been told to stay in place, and then they'd been told to evacuate, and then they were told to stay in place. They were confused and did not know what to do. Meanwhile, in the midst of all of this confusion, one of the members of my church who was blind was dropped off right there at our church, right next to where this happened, by the Special Transportation Service of Metro government. And she was left there standing there with police, fire people all around her, not knowing what in the world was going on. Well, as it ends up, the other concern was that the fuel would get into nearby Richland Creek. Well, as it ends up, only the truck driver was slightly injured. Miraculously, truly miraculously, nobody was killed at that plastics factory, because I promise you that I saw that ball of fire go completely over that building. And luckily, no gas got into the creek. But it could have been so much worse. And by the way, a month earlier, we would have had about 40 neighborhood children in our summer program playing in the churchyard, very close to where that explosion took place. It could have hurt them seriously. So my point in sharing this is that accidents involving highly volatile fossil fuel products do happen with some frequency and always without warning. Local citizens and local officials know the lay of the land where they live, work, learn, play, and worship better than any outside agency. They can therefore evaluate the risks to health, safety, and environmental protection related to the placement of fossil fuel infrastructure in their communities most accurately.
That's
Please
been
stop-
3 minutes,
Please
sir.
stop this bill. Strong local oversight is necessary. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your presentation. All right, all presenters, stay for a second in case any committee members might have any questions about from anybody individually. So, committee members, Mrs. Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to come and present before the committee. I know you've come before and we had to put it off another week, so we really appreciate you coming back time and time again to make sure that your voices are heard and that your voices are on the record. I want to thank Marquita for her testimony because I did go to Home Facts and I did put in the zip code for where I live, and it did come back with like 229. But I also put it in for Collierville, and it had 0. See Memphis. Bartlett, 0. Closest, Memphis. Cordova, 0. Lakeland, 0. Now, these are all the ones within Shelby County area. Arlington, it did have 4. So the point she's making about carrying the burden of it is real. It's real. And even with Memphis carrying that burden, there was a company that still wanted to do more in Memphis. And there's plenty of other land, other places they can go. Build it out there. Plenty of land available. And so I appreciate the point you made because it truly can personalize it for you. And I encourage members to do that. Put your zip code in. Put your grandparents, your mother, your nieces, your cousins, put their zip code in and see the burden their community is having with this. And that's not an anti-anything. It's just fact that locals should have the ability to determine what's best for their community. So I want to thank you all for coming and representing your community and letting your voices be heard and being on the record for how this could impact you and how it has impact. And I really appreciated your testimony dealing with the ability for the county, in this case, stepped in and negotiated and had some power to negotiate for what was best for that community and how far they can go. And if this bill passes and takes away that ability, it's going to do damage. Because those companies, their responsibility is to their stockholders, the board, and that's fine. That's what businesses do. Not mad about it. But your elected representatives work for you. You're their board. And so I think having that ability to represent you in these instances is keenly important. So thank you for your testimony, all of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Next, we have Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for the young lady in the glasses in the blue. You had referenced energy infrastructure, and then you talked about the burdens of pollution in the community. Can you give specific examples and studies related to pollution and what the cause of the pollution was, what the result has been, and give some studies related to that, please?
Hello. I appreciate that you got so much from so little compared to my counterparts. I'm going to defer to Ms. Bradshaw, who can definitely answer your question.
Your microphone.
The state of Tennessee has an environmental justice plan that was put together over time between Democratic and Republican governors. It's in place right now. It's a document that's over 20 years old that collected information and went that was done by TDEC that accurately describes which communities have been carrying the burden of pollution and the different community members that probably were alive then when they did their report, because a lot of people are dead. And also, if you're wondering about a particular site, you can go to EPA.gov or TDEC to find that actual site and see what the remediation plan was. For instance, the the site that was down the street from where I grew up was during the Base Closure Act of 1995, and the remediation plan is under the Defense Depot, Memphis, Tennessee, Department of Defense facility, and it will tell you about the 6 inches of dirt that was removed that was full of lead, arsenic, and mercury. The many nuclear warheads that were actually misplaced in the community, along with the other 360 known carcinogen chemicals, and also the type of chemicals that actually kill vegetation and people used in chemical weapons and war. And you could actually see that. So that's where you can go. Is there a particular community that you have in mind?
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, the question was specifically related to the examples in the community. And let me make sure I understood what you just said. You said nuclear warheads. You just referenced nuclear warheads in your testimony to this committee. Are you saying that in Memphis, Tennessee, in the last 20 years, there have been discoveries of nuclear warheads within the infrastructure as a result of energy infrastructure?
I'm just saying that was used as an example of where you could get the remediation plan. And I used a site that I was very familiar with. As far as energy infrastructure, you can go to even Home Facts. You have spills or whatever, where you can actually look at that community and see where those tanks and spills were and what's the name of the actual polluting facility. That's the reason why I like Home Facts, because people need to know where their homes are going to be built or where they live and the type of pollution. And so if you go into your community on Home Facts and you go to tanks and spills, and you can actually click at those tanks and spills, and it will give you detail of those tanks and spills. And then you can actually go to TDEC to actually see what the remediation plans for those tanks and spills are. And so in Memphis, that's the reason why I love that site. So, because it makes it so plain. Representative Camper, when you looked it up, when you saw tanks and spills, did you see, it should be a way that you can click on those tanks and spills, and then you can research it as to your community. And then if you don't see it in your community, please go use Memphis, Tennessee, and use my zip code 38117 or 38106, where I grew up, and see those tanks and spills for yourself.
Thank you, Ms. Bradshaw. Did that answer your question?
It did not, but it does answer my question. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. Next up, I think Chairman Vaughn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify something. Leader Camper said there wasn't any environmental issues in my community. I'd like to say that we've got 3 sites on the national priority list, which categorizes them as Superfund sites. We have the Carrier Air Conditioning Plant, the Piper Smalley Plow Works, and then Washington Street Machine Shop, which is frankly 1,400 feet from my house. All of those are point source polluters. We also have a crude oil pipeline and natural gas pipeline, which the natural gas pipeline runs through my community to serve Memphis's needs for natural gas. If we had decided that we didn't want MLG&W running their natural gas through our community, then they would have had to have gone somewhere else. But I just wanted to make sure that we were on the record that pollution occurs everywhere, and none of the pollution and national priority list sites in my community are as a result of energy infrastructure. They're from industrial habits that were poor for the era of which they were performed. I just thought it was important. I'm not familiar with this site, this website, but I do know that the EPA, US EPA, does have those sites on its NPL. So just a point of clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next up, Representative Towns.
Chairman, thank you. And the chairman of the committee, thank you for that as well. I'll say that some communities are inundated with, I think the point is that some communities are inundated with this pollution and so forth, and it's impacting health almost in real time, And yeah, pollution obviously is everywhere. And I think this is the reason that we have people here that are telling us we got to do a better job as it relates to our waters, our land, our air being polluted. The fascinating thing about water, ladies and gentlemen, is that everything has to have water. Not everybody, but everything has to have water. And good, clean water is invaluable. You think gold is invaluable, platinum or plutonium or this or another. Try being without water for any length of time. Okay, we have to have water and we have to protect it as well. And it's not anti-commerce or industry, because without having industry and jobs for our people to go to, we know that is a dire and a bad situation. But it's got to be balanced properly. And you got to understand, you all are saying is that when you balance it properly, you cannot let it unilaterally go to the guy who has the biggest muscle or the biggest wallet. Okay, that's not fair to us, because we pay all the taxes, and what we're trying to do is just simply live. We want industry. Every community wants industry. Okay, but some things are more lethal than others. In your Dixon community there, Mr. Nolan, I remember on 60 Minutes, there was a cluster of people having cancer in your community some time ago. It went around the world and went around the country because of what was happening in the soil, the runoff, the pollution by industry. Now, I appreciate you all reminding us, and which some of us keep at top of mind, who you work for, who we work for, okay? Who we work for are the citizens across the state of Tennessee. Make no mistake about that. That's who we work for. That's who sent us here. That's who pay all the bills. That's who has to have some say and impact on a measure of this nature at all times, not just today, but at all times. But I'm not saying that where we say that we're going to run.
Representative Towns.
Yes, sir.
I hate to interrupt you.
Go
but
ahead, sir.
We have another panel that needs to get up here. Do you have
Okay, no
you-
problem, sir. Go ahead. Let him come. Point
Thank
made.
you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Come on, Mr.
Representative
Chairman. You're good.
We have one last question from Representative Calfee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the lady in the white sweater there that's been speaking to us, number one, I'm sorry for your mother's health condition. You said she was needing a kidney transplant because of pipelines. Now, could you clarify that for me a little bit? Are these pipelines leaking? And if
Listen.
so, what's the remedial action?
Tell you that pollution, the burden or whatever, from her house, is we actually felt a gas explosion from Vasicol when it exploded. And in our community, like we are not that far away from the energy infrastructure, along with the other pollutants. All of those things add up to break down public health. And so I implore you to understand, even in energy infrastructure, going through Memphis, there's so much legacy pollution. Like to have 226 Superfund sites, that means there's 226 remediation plans. That means that there are either caps or in some places where they just removed a small amount of dirt and left the pollution there. There's clay caps, and that information is sometimes lost over time. And so when you have a pipeline come through, it sometimes re-exposes the community all over again with the actual building of the infrastructure, along with putting pipelines in places where there is so much pollution, where the corrosion effects of those pipelines are that normally would happen without pollution around, will also increase, and that make it more, it means that it could be more accidents over time. And so
Ms.
we're
Bradshaw,
saying that.
Thank you for those remarks. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
No, but let's move on.
All
Thank
right, thank you. All right,
Yes.
panel, thank you for y'all's time. We'll bring the next presenters up. All right, we have Ms. Stillman, Mr. Pearson, Mr. Houston, Mr. Minalt, and Mr. Waterman. Okay. All right. I think Ms. Stillman, let's give her, let me see, we called 6, we got 3. So let's see who we have. Got Stillman?
Yes.
All right. Houston
Yes.
and
Minot.
Minot. Okay. Very good. Thank y'all for being here. Ms. Stillman, you're up. Please identify yourself and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. My name's Allison Stillman, and I am a property owner here in Hendersonville, about 30 minutes from here. I'm also a business owner, and I work with a lot of different organizations across this state. And I'm here because I feel as if my civil liberties are at threat with this bill, that my right to choose, my right to speak, my First Amendment rights are threatened by this bill. And I could echo every single thing that was said here today. But as a registered voter, and I think Representative Towns said it so well, you all were elected by us to serve us, not to serve outside business interests that are more interested in their bottom line than taking care of the people of the state of Tennessee. This is an egregious bill that looks to take away my rights as a voter, as a business owner, as a property owner, and all of our elected officials in our municipal districts. And to me, that just doesn't work. And it won't end here. Should you decide you want to pass this and take away my rights as a voter, as a business owner, and a property owner, that's not okay with me. And I came here to voice that to all of you who work for me and every other person in this room. We hired you to protect our interests, to protect our children, to protect our property, our businesses, and our families. So I urge you to please do what you were elected to do and protect my civil liberties, my First Amendment rights, and my rights to choose. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and the committee, my name is Sarah Houston. I'm the Executive Director of Protect Our Aquifer, and our mission is pretty simple. We aim to protect, preserve, and conserve the Memphis Sand Aquifer. The Memphis Sand Aquifer and the Fort Pillow aquifers are the only source of drinking water supply to West Tennessee, 1.5 million Tennesseans. They're also where all of our industrial users get their drinking or get their water for their processes, and any agriculture users that have pivot systems. So this is a very valuable asset to West Tennessee. I recognize that this bill was introduced late in session. We normally aren't too active in the state legislature, but we felt very compelled to come and speak to this and work on this issue today. I do appreciate the amendments we have seen and the stakeholder meeting that was hosted 2 weeks ago. But the reality is that this bill is still very broad, and in a basic sense, it really aims to preempt local decision-making in all 95 Tennessee counties. Two big gray areas are in the definitions of industrial facilities and industrial materials. Those are very, very broad. And one of those, industrial solvents, is one of those. And industrial solvents are used in many different industries, and energy infrastructure is a big one. And I think that the intent was meant well, but it is far from the reality of what this bill does dictate. Our aquifer is a major asset in West Tennessee, and there are 191 active remediation sites right now throughout that area. And when we're talking about remediation, you're never cleaning it all the way up. You're getting the majority. There's usually a threshold of what needs to be close to cleaned up. And we have currently 191 active ones. Many of these are polluted with industrial solvents, leaking gas stations, and underground storage tanks. And that's the items in this bill that would be excluded from that type of local say and that type of local siting. And at Protect Our Aquifer, we've got Ford Motor Company coming in to bring in a historic investment. Their sole source of water is going to be the Memphis Sand Aquifer. We're going to see massive land use changes throughout West Tennessee. And we envision, a thriving region where you've got new businesses coming in, you have old businesses thriving, but we expect these entities to come in with a role protecting our water supply. And the truth is, we are dealing with legacy pollution throughout this whole region, and we need responsible growth, not unchecked expansion. This bill would remove so much of that opportunity to be a valuable player in the expansion of this type of energy infrastructure. About this time last year, Byhalia Pipeline, we found out there was actually an existing pipeline that connected point A at the Diamond pipeline and Valero to point B at the Cap line. There was an existing crude oil pipeline there. The Byhalia connection did not ever disclose in their permitting process to TDEC or in their permitting process to the Army Corps of Engineers. And that was very concerning, not only for us, but for our local officials and for our state regulators. So they
Ms. Houston?
intentionally misinformed the community on that. Yes,
Can-
sir. Thank you so
Time.
much.
Thank you.
And I would be happy to say that I'm open to any questions, especially when it comes to the known pollution that we do have in existence right now.
Thank you. Mr. Murnau?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kent Minot. I chair the Sierra Club's political committee in Knoxville, Tennessee, speaking against HH 246. I feel that this legislation is in response to the mostly conservative folks in Anderson County near Knoxville who have come together to advocate for the proper disposal of the mountain of coal ash TVA is piled up next to a local playground where the containment fabric that keeps the coal ash from the kids had been ruptured, forcing temporary closure of the park. I might add that the Anderson County Commission has unanimously passed a resolution in fiery opposition to this bill. I think the bill is also in response to the mostly liberal folks in Shelby County who came out, protested, organized, and campaigned against the Byhalia pipeline until the project was abandoned. Let's make no mistake, this proposed legislation is also about the Byhalia pipeline, the Bull Run coal ash pile, just like it's about TVA's attempt to use eminent domain to grab land in areas of Middle Tennessee to expand gas pipeline infrastructure. The fossil fuel industry has some handy tools in the state legislature to make sure that the citizens of this state won't be able to disrupt their plans anymore. They don't like democracy. They don't like informed public opinion. It's just too inconvenient for them. They've clearly noticed that voters across party lines support investments in more clean energy, and that by substantial majorities, they also want oil and gas companies to stop using this moment to pad their already huge profits. Looking at recent Data for Progress survey, I see that conservatives and liberals alike consistently poll in favor of reducing greenhouse gases and transitioning to renewables like solar and wind. That's why these framers don't want either conservatives or liberals to have any say over what happens in their own backyards. Now, this doesn't mean that all Tennesseans will oppose all fossil fuel infrastructure. In many cases, they might approve of it, but in all cases, they want to have a say. They want their local elected officials to be accountable to them for what they approve and what they vote down. And they really don't want to give up a vital step in our democracy. Local, state, federal. Power is supposed to be exercised all the way up. And that's why these people came to this room today, to make sure folks have a say in all 95 counties in this state. I think the framers of this bill know that too. And that's why they rushed the bill through without time for key stakeholders to respond or even realize the bill's impacts. That's why both the original amendment and the revised amendment were kept out of public view for several days on the legislature website. When you're perpetrating government overreach, you don't want people to know. As a Sierra Club volunteer, I work with Tennesseans of all political stripes. Liberals and conservatives can come together on issues we all care about, and we do so regularly. We're doing so today, to stop a bill specifically drafted to give away to private companies the power of self-determination that rightfully belongs to the people. Please kill this undemocratic bill today. And thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. You nailed the 3-minute mark. All right. Questions to the panel. I think we have Representative Powell first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I did have some questions to the previous panel, but that's all right. I'll ask them to this panel because I wasn't called. But can you speak specifically? I guess my questions are more directed on this aquifer situation. And I get this argument about, loss of rights and different local control versus state control. Honestly, I come to believe whichever side wants to use that argument just uses that argument. And so I'm more concerned about, honestly, the true safety of and preserving Memphis as a whole in Shelby County for it to continue to remain a thriving community. Because obviously, without a thriving Shelby County and thriving Memphis, we don't have a thriving Tennessee. So my question is, what specific dangers does this proposed pipeline present to the aquifer and the drinking water for the citizens of Memphis and Shelby County?
Thank you for that question. Luckily, there is no current proposed pipeline. So we do not have any specific pipeline on the books. We have heard that they're not planning to come back. If this bill were to pass, we're not sure if that would. But depending on what they're going to be, traveling through this pipeline, usually you have crude oil that contains constituents like benzene. Benzene is very harmful to human health. It is one of the byproducts of crude oil. So after, a leak or a spill, it actually, floats atop water. But then as it breaks down, those chemical constituents actually become denser than water. And so benzene has issues with lowering your red blood cell count. It can cause immuno disorders. It can also increase the potential for infection. And that's just an example of one chemical constituent that is contained in what would be carried within a pipeline.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I could, in a follow-up question to that, so my understanding is the levels in the aquifer have decreased over the years. Is that right?
That is correct.
And I know there was an ongoing situation where I think Mississippi was also potentially looking at some different legal challenges to Tennessee over pulling water from the aquifer.
That is correct.
So I guess all that to say, why, in your opinion, would anyone want to look at some sort of, and I get we all like cheap energy, but water is an essential life element. And so, I mean, what would happen if this aquifer was polluted, or this pipeline was brought close enough to if the pipeline was brought close enough to the aquifer, what would potentially happen to the city of Memphis and the entire Shelby County community?
We definitely would have concerns with human health first and foremost. Secondly, you can compromise our well fields, and each municipal well costs about $1 million to drill. So when you're talking about a well field, you're talking about 20 wells, and that becomes a very large impact to municipal ratepayers, water ratepayers, taxpayers, and sometimes it comes down to actually trying to get additional funds from the federal government to just deal with the level of pollution. We have a lot of pollution in existence in Shelby County. We have remediation that's occurring. We have remediation that's planned. And so an additional pipeline would just exacerbate this issue. We are looking at responsible, smart growth, not just this unchecked expansion.
And
Representative Powell?
One last question, I guess, and pardon me for the lack of knowledge on this, but I mean, are there other alternative water sources? The Mississippi River obviously is going through. So why is that not? Why is that? If you could, just for the layman here,
Sure.
if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it. I think it's worth the committee knowing that.
Absolutely. Well, the Memphis Sand Aquifer, we are blessed with incredible geology in West Tennessee. You have a shallow aquifer system. It's not the greatest, kind of muddy consistency. You've got a thick clay layer that actually has acted as a protective barrier over the past 100 years. And then you have this Memphis Sand Aquifer that below Memphis, it starts about 400 feet below ground. And it is some of the cleanest, most pristine water in the country that fell as rain 2,000 years ago. So a lot of this is pre-industrial pollution water. The Mississippi River is a beautiful body of water, but it contains about every man-made chemical constituent you could possibly imagine. And just from an economic perspective, it's very expensive to treat surface water compared to pulling it up from the aquifer, doing a little aeration, do a little chlorination, and send it on to our houses. So economically, it's also much less expensive to maintain groundwater systems when the aquifer is not polluted than if you were to have a surface water system.
All right, let's move on. Representative Towns?
Here again, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for your presentation as well. Can you give me an idea, in the event that 1 gallon of this product seeps into the water, how much water does 1 gallon contaminate?
It's a great question. I should have brought a little demonstration table. Do a lot of education. 1 gallon of crude oil can contaminate 1 million gallons of groundwater. And you think about just how water spreads, it gets less and less, concentrated, but still any amount of that kind of chemical that you intake into your body is going to cause harm. So it can pollute a much larger amount of groundwater.
Saying 1 million gallons?
1 million
of water?
gallons. Correct.
Wow. Secondly, aquifers that have this kind of industry over it, and the aquifers are supposedly lined. Typically, how long does that lining last, if you have an idea?
I don't necessarily. There have been figures that show that actually the most prevalent leaks in pipelines are actually happening in pipelines that have been built within the past 10 years. So it's kind of counterintuitive what you'd think older infrastructure is leaking, but some of these newer materials are actually leaking more frequently.
That's news to me. And before we catch it, typically, how long do you think it would leak before some of our people catch it? Do we have any data on that?
That there is data on that, and so the majority of data revolves around major leaks, so any spills. But really, our biggest concern is an undetected leak, and the Colonial Pipeline that goes out to the East Coast, there was an undetected leak in that eventually spilled over 1 million gallons of refined gasoline, and it was children in the woods playing that stumbled upon this puddle of gasoline, and it went undetected. All the monitoring detections did not pick this up because there wasn't a significant drop in pressure. It was just a slow leak, but went undetected for months. And that, ended up actually causing a neighborhood. The pipeline company came and bought the homes in that neighborhood and used that as their remediation staging facility. And so people were displaced from that spill in North Carolina.
And that they eventually clean the water up. It's got to take a long time and lots of
It
money.
will never be totally clean, but they are currently remediating it. And you also have the soil vapors. People are breathing in this benzene and a lot of other constituents.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you as well.
Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to be real brief. I know that people in Middle and East Tennessee are really tired of hearing about the Memphis Sands Aquifer. I've been around it all my life. During college, I worked at water pumping stations. I've toured the pumping stations, and the water does come out of the ground crystal clear, takes a minimum amount of processing before it goes out to our taps, and it's consistently well above EPA standards. And I think really, I think people in other regions of the state too can identify. You want clean rivers, streams, creeks, lakes, everything. So, and I think a lot of the argument here between that and the positive things about the bill are, what's more valuable? How are we going to balance getting energy supply versus protecting our natural resources? And I'm going to leave it at that right now, but that seems to be the biggest argument.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. That concludes our questions. Thank you to the panel for coming, and we're going to go back into session. I think we have some questions to our sponsor, starting with Leader Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, lots to unpack. A couple things I heard. One thing I heard from one of the testifiers at the beginning is that the pipelines create brownfields. I want to give a shout out to one of the greatest plants God ever gave us. That's the hemp plant. It can actually reclaim a brownfield. Just want y'all to know that. The other thing that I heard by almost every testifier, and this is something I'm very interested in, Chairman Vaughn, is the takeaway of the local control. I do agree with the representative from Davidson County that depending on what side of the aisle and what the bill is we use the whole notion of giving local control. But when what we heard from all those half dozen or so testifiers is that we've taken so much local control away from them that it's egregious to the people. And I'm just wondering, can you kind of talk us through in the committee, what does that mean? What are they saying when they say we've just ripped all the local control away using your bill?
Thank you, Chairman Faison. Yeah, I heard that as well, and I guess I fall into the category of, well, there's some Dave Mason lyrics that we don't see eye to eye. Ain't no good guys, ain't no bad guys, just you and me. We simply disagree. That's kind of the way I feel about this. But let me go back to the words of the bill, not the narrative that's been on the internet, not the claims. Let's talk about the words, and I'm gonna read the words in the bill to you. A political subdivision of the state shall not, arising from a local action, prohibit the development and implementation of the types or source of energy that may be used, delivered, converted, or supplied by the following entities. And it goes through that. Goes through a few more, but then in section C, it says this section does not prevent nor preempt a local action that is state authorized, ministerial in nature pertaining to land use, generally applicable to similar types of commercial and industrial activities, and necessary to provide a public benefit. Zoning is a state authorized ministerial nature to control land use. That is not preempted by this bill. What the bill preempts is an absolute prohibition. So when we hear about the setback, if a community wants to provide reasonable setbacks that don't result in a de facto prohibition, they're able to do so. Again, with regards to the aquifer, and let me say, the Memphis Sands Aquifer is a gift from God. It's unbelievable. And it has endured in spite of all of the industry and all of the activities and all of the fuel stations and all of the pipelines, all that run on top of it. It still endures and it's still providing a fabulous resource to the community. Wellhead protection is also a zoned legislative act that a local political jurisdiction can utilize to control this. And then on top of it, we went on top of that, we also added that a local action arising from authority granted to administer a program in lieu of the TDEC. So if TDEC tells a local community, you need to do this, this does not preempt that. So the narrative is that this is a bill that seeks to, first off, the reliving of the pipeline project in Memphis. This bill has nothing to do with that. As a matter of fact, the City of Memphis does not have an ordinance that bans or prohibits. City of Memphis is in compliance with this. So it would have no impact because they're not in violation of this. This is a look forward down the line to say a well-intentioned small local community to say, we're going to get in the business of ensuring that we're going to regulate how other people, we're going to interrupt how other people throughout the state get their energy supplied. That's what this bill protects against.
Mr. Chair, thank you. That kind of clears up some for me. I do have further questions. Where I have to put things in perspective for me to kind of understand it. So, Chairman Vaughn, with your indulgence, where I live, I dug a water line 4,000 feet from the main road, and I live way up on a mountain. My boys and I worked for several weeks to make sure this happened. In the water line that's almost a mile long, and since the last 2,000 feet of it goes straight up a mountain, we put fail safes in. We call them a check valve in case there was an issue, so there wasn't a backup. Since I'm on the mountain, all that water will be pushing back down. I'm wondering, Chairman Vaughn, with your legislation, is it part of the requirements if we're going to have these pipelines in? What are the fail safes? So about 3 or 4 weeks ago, it had been raining for a week in the Smoky Mountains. A UPS truck got in some soft dirt close to a driveway down at the end, and somehow he got buried so deep that he actually broke my water line because he was trying to get out and it broke the water line. Anyway, we didn't lose all the water going up because we had a fail safe on it. A check valve is what we would call it. In your legislation, does your legislation prohibit cities, municipalities, local governments from putting in correct fail safes, check valves, whatever they call them, for a fossil fuel pipeline?
It does not.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Representative Faison. Representative Powell next.
Thank you. I guess I had a question here is, so if a city or a community, because I listened to you read the bill, has objections about a pipeline going through, can they simply prevent it through zoning, a zoning change then?
Chairman?
It depends on what that zoning change is. If they provide, if it's a de facto prohibition, if they change zoning immediately just to keep that pipeline from occurring, then that's not allowed. But however, if they want to say that pipelines are restricted to this area under these conditions, and people come in and do what they need to do and meet those guidelines, then it doesn't preempt them from doing that. Does that make sense? They can exert influence and control, but they cannot outright prohibit or de facto prohibit.
So I guess my question is it possible for these pipelines to then run through residential zoned areas?
Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, one of the aspects of this is that due to the urbanization and growth of different areas, as the demands for energy grow, it also has more people to be fed through. And you have to, those are issues that everyone has to deal with. When a pipeline was laid, the area around it may not be residential, but it may be residential today. We carried legislation last year that dealt with developers having to notify planning boards of and pipeline companies of when developments were happening near them, so that everybody could work together. And this bill primarily is a coexistence bill. That's what it really tends to. It acknowledges the fact that there's energy infrastructure that's critical to supply our citizens' needs, but it also gives the influence of the routing and siting and the construction methodology to those communities still by the fact that we're not preempting all zoning. This is not giving a carte blanche to pipelines. What it's doing is it's giving it, and by the way, it affects, just so we're clear, it deals with much more types of energy structures than just pipelines. The pipeline mode kind of got hijacked on this early on because of misinterpretation of the bill's intent. So it's more a coexistence bill than it prevents prohibitions and bans.
Representative Powell?
I guess my issue and concern here is, and when you use the word coexistence, I've heard basically testimony here, if we had a disruption because of these pipelines or because of these different energy sources, I don't think you can any further, you would be able to have coexistence, because you would have people that can no longer live in certain communities because of a disruption to their water and other environmental consequences. And I guess that's my biggest concern. I just want to share something that happened in my district. Several years ago, there was the Columbia Pipeline. It was a company out of Houston, American company. They wanted to expand their pipeline footprint. And for whatever reason, they decided they wanted to put one of their compressor stations in my district. There were a lot of different places they could have selected that would not have been in an urban environment, that would have been far away from people. But they wanted to put it in an urban environment because it was easier for that company to tend to a gas compressor station in an urban environment rather than a rural environment. And so I was faced in this, there was a preemption bill that we passed here in this General Assembly that allowed that Columbia Pipeline to go in my district and that compressor station to take place, even though, again, it could have gone in many other places where it wouldn't have affected the community. And you know what happened to Columbia Pipeline and that company? They were purchased by an international company that is not in the United States. And so now we have a company that is no longer domiciled in the United States of America that has say over what goes on in a compressor station in my district, in my community. And I guess my concern here is ultimately we could have the same thing here, is where we have somebody that puts in one of these pipelines. It might not even be an American company. Yet they are having a say over what happens in one of the greatest cities in the United States of America. And I think that's a national security issue. I think that's a threat to this country. And I know, Mr. Chairman, I'm not insinuating that you're trying to do that with this legislation, but that was something that never even occurred to me, that literally this control that we have went from being local control taken away to then state control taken away to now national control taken away, where ultimately an international corporation has a say on what goes on with our community. So I just would caution my colleagues to be very thoughtful when you vote for this, because this could have significant ramifications with interest that might not even lie with our own nation. So with that, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative Powell. Any response, Chairman? No. Okay. Representative Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's been an implication about that this bill will also help to control the cost of oil and gas in our society. And I know this is a political issue we hear year after year. This year, people in the majority party here like to say that our the president not allowing the Canadian pipeline is causing gas prices to go way up. I remember in 2008, we Democrats were yelling at the Republicans for gas prices going up then, but quite frankly, gas prices primarily it's a global commodity that's caused by a lot of different things happening throughout the world. When OPEC decides they want to reduce the supply, our prices go up. When Russia decides they want to start a war, prices go up. It's going to happen. I'm not sure that having more freedom to build pipelines is going to affect that much anyway. I know it's easier and cheaper to transport oil and gas through pipelines than it is other means. But again, we're facing potential consequences. What would happen if we have a spill or a rupture somewhere? Is the state going to clean it up? Is the state responsible for cleaning that up, paying for the cleanup itself? I think there's just way too many questions here. I mean, and again, we're taking away local input we're reducing the rights of people in their localities. We're taking away rights to redress of grievances, to allow them to do that. Now, I understand actually, I really do understand both sides, but this is getting too complicated. The whole issue is complicated. And I think the best thing that we could do, and it was suggested once in our in the stakeholder meeting, that a TASER study would be the best thing to look at all the implications, look at all the details of this. And I would hope that maybe we could pause this bill, have a good study, hopefully a TASER study, and bring it back to us at a later time. This is not an emergency. We don't have an emergency that's emergency situation. This and I think thoughtful study would benefit us all in the long run.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Zachary next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2020, this nation was energy independent, and a comment was just made that we are now dependent on OPEC and Russia, and that is why we see the fluctuation of energy and gas prices. And that's absolutely true, but that was not the case in 2020 when this nation was completely energy independent. We are now dependent on OPEC, our negotiation with the Saudis, and Russia, which is driving our energy prices and has put us on the verge of an energy recession. So I think it's important to remember that. But I think it's also important when we have all this, the hyperbole from the presenters, it's sometimes important just to go to the facts, and you can go to the federal government for some of those facts. According to the United States Department of Transportation, per the Department of Transportation, pipelines are the safest mode of energy and transportation. I'm reading directly. Accidents are rare. According to the most recent numbers available, 99.99999.7% of gas and crude oil is moved safely through interstate transmission pipelines. And from the National Transportation Board of Safety, it shows pipelines make up 100.01% of all transportation accidents in the U.S. According to the U.S. Department of Transportation, the transportation of oil and gas through a pipeline is a much safer mode of transportation than rail, tanker, or truck. So, Mr. Chairman, sometimes it's just important to go to the facts, and fortunately, our U.S. Department of Transportation has those facts listed. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Next, Leader Faison. All right, we have a question on the bill. All in favor of calling the question, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The question has been passed, so we're going to be voting on the bill. So, all right, members. All right. We're going to be voting on 2246. If approved, it would be passed on to Finance Sub. It's too late for roll call. Should have been called earlier. Taken action, voted on the bill and the amendment, so we cannot call a roll call at this time. So do we have three members calling a roll call? All right, there will be a roll call vote then. All right. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Representatives Alexander. Boyd. Boyd votes aye. Calfee. Calfee votes aye. Camper. Camper votes no. Faison. Faison votes aye. Haston. Haston votes aye. Hazelwood. Hazelwood votes aye. Holzclaw. Holzclaw votes aye. Johnson. Johnson votes aye. Lynn. Lynn votes aye. Manis. Manis votes aye. Moon. Moon votes aye. Powell. Powell votes no. Powers. Powers votes aye. Sparks. Sparks votes aye. Thompson. Thompson votes no. Towns. Towns votes no. Vital. Vital votes aye. Zachary. Zachary votes aye. Vice Chairman Bricken.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Bricken votes aye. Chairman Vaughn. Chairman Vaughn votes aye. Mr. Chairman, you have 16 ayes and 4 noes.
The motion passes. The bill goes on to Finance Sub. I'm going to pass the gavel over to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That will conclude, that is going to conclude our business for the year here in House Full Commerce. Want to say thank you to the brilliant legal minds of Jamie Shanks and Matt King, who serve us well here during our committee. Also, Love and Middleton Dunn does great work on our behalf. Ben Voitis, our trusty research analyst, Owen Rosenberg, my right hand over there, Addison and Jack, who are our clerks, Mr. Reuben Sanders, our sergeant at arms, capably keeping order amongst us. And then our subcommittee chairs, Dennis Powers, and Clark Board, thank you for your service. And I will say this. Oh, and I'm sorry, I don't have our archivist's name. But I will throw a shout out and thank you to the archivist, whoever's here with us on each day. We do love our archivists. Got to do, I need a filter of those something whenever I see the live stream. You got to do something with this ugly mug. I see also recognize Speaker Johnson over here before we wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to tell all the members what an honor it is, has been to serve on this committee, and what an honor it has been to have Chairman Vaughn as our chairman. Great job.
Thank you, sir. That's high praise coming from the deputy speaker. Makes my head swell a little bit. So what we will do,
Just real quickly, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to introduce a guest that's come in the room. Mr. Cash Daniels is a 12-year-old young man from my district. He is known throughout the state as the Conservation Kid. He was recently selected by Time Magazine out of 10,000 young people, one of the top 5 young conservationists for his litter pickup and protection of our Tennessee state parks. I want to welcome him.
Cash deserves a shout out on the strength of that jacket alone. That is very, very strong.
And he's a shark. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Calfee.
Well, thank you, sir. The deputy speaker here kind of took my thunder away. I want to tell what a great job you've done. I've served on a lot of committees in the last 10 years, and you've been one of the better chairmen. And you do have a sense of humor, keeps things light and moving along. And thank you.
Thank you, Representative Calfee, and you, sir, are going to be missed next year. Chairman Hazelwood.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you just stole some of my thunder. I've served on this committee since I was elected in 2014, and I have served with Representative Calfee for that entire time in various roles, and just wanted to say we will miss him when he's back home in Pennyrile this time next year.
We know that he and the Silver Fox will be doing their thing all over. Never mind, we're just going to move on. And they will be enjoying retirement. They will be enjoying retirement. And we are going to adjourn. We're going to close this committee subject to the call of the chair so I can crawl under this desk.